I'm John Law, this is Chasing Cars, and behind me is the 2022 Kia e-Niro electric vehicle. This isn't the facelifted Niro that we're expecting to arrive in 6 to 8 months, but you can tell it's a 2022 model because it's got this rather snazzy, modern, new Kia badging, and you can tell it's the electric model because it's got this plug-in port at the front, blanked off grille, and the extra blue bits, because of course, Kia does sell this vehicle in several other permutations, including hybrid, series parallel, and also plug-in hybrid. But the car we have here is the range-topping flagship Niro, the electric model in sport trim, slightly more expensive than the S trim, and actually on that topic, it costs $79.90. And that puts this Kia e-Niro right at the top of Australia's Kia range. It's only outpriced by the Kia Sorento plug-in hybrid that we recently reviewed here at Chasing Cars, and at $71,000 or $10 less, it's also more expensive than something like a Kia Stinger 3.3 GT. So is it good enough? Well, that's what we're going to find out in this review, because it's got to be pretty good with new competitors on the block. Now, before we dive into the review proper of the Kia Niro EV, I want to let you guys know that next Friday, we're going to have a video dropping of a full walk around of Kia's next EV, the EV6. So if you're not already, make sure you hit subscribe for that. That brings me to the high points and the low points of this car. Starting with the low points, number one, its price. At $79.90 on the road here in New South Wales, it's got to compete with fresh competitors like the Polestar 2 and of course the long-running Tesla Model 3, which both offer slightly more range than this vehicle for pretty much the same price. And for me, it doesn't look striking enough to really make inroads as an EV. It certainly doesn't look like Kia's EV6. It's the sort of genesis of EVs for the Kia and Hyundai brands, much like the Hyundai Ioniq, and also it doesn't really have a particular party piece. Sure, it's a very competent vehicle, but there's nothing about it that shouts, "Oh my God, look at me, I'm a Kia e-Niro." But now onto the good points. One of those is the 450 kilometer WLTP range, which is pretty competitive, and it's also very true and accurate on the trip meter. Certainly from our testing, we found it to be pretty accurate. It also has a surprisingly good chassis and pretty punchy dynamics out on the road, which is something you might not expect from a small SUV. And finally, it's actually a really well packaged car sitting on a really long 2700mm wheelbase, makes it, in the small SUV category, a very good option if you're looking at a rideshare vehicle. Now we're going to jump into the review, starting talking about the design. And of course, if you have any comments on this car, let me know in the comment section down below. While you're down there, we'd also love it if you could hit subscribe. So yes, the design. It's definitely not one of the high points of the e-Niro, unfortunately. It is kind of a bit like the Kia Rondo 7, dare I say it. The proportions are a bit funky, but as we'll get to in a minute, that actually really pays off in some areas. You've also got these 17-inch alloy wheels here with a bit of an electric design. You've got your blue flares at the front, and overall it's pretty anonymous, inoffensive, and isn't going to grab headlines, but I don't think anyone's going to really hate how this car looks either. But you can let me know in the comment section what you think. If you've spent much time in one of Kia's small cars, then I reckon you'll feel pretty at home inside the Niro. It certainly feels an extra half a generation older than Kia's latest products like the new Sportage and Sorento, both of which are presented immaculately. It just feels like the previous generation of Kia interior design, because it is. It may be a new car to Australia, but the Niro's been on sale in Europe and in other markets since about 2017, and that pervades plenty of aspects of this interior. Again, not to say it's bad, it's simple and easy to understand, and you've got some pretty nice tech, including this 10.25-inch touchscreen, which runs Kia's really straightforward Android operating system. Of course, ongoing dispute with smartphone manufacturers means no wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but you do get wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and you get a pretty decent 8-speaker JBL stereo in this range-topping Sport, which is a nice little touch and does a pretty good job of rendering the music, and the shape of this car does lend itself quite well to being a good little theatre. So all pretty good there. Below that, we've got nice and easy to use shortcut buttons, volume control, tuning knob, and then again, although the climate is accessible through the touchscreen, we have physical controls down here, keeping it straightforward, easy to use, and simple. Below that, we've got a little storage tray, really good for your phone, USB ports, connection for the Apple CarPlay, and your 12-volt socket as well. Then you've got this juicy, big old space for carrying something like a handbag or, you know, a notebook so you don't forget what you're going to talk about. Very nice. And then little roller door below here, 2 cup holders, good size for a little takeaway coffee cup. And they're also rubberized so they can fit something like a bottle in there nice and well without rattling around and being too annoying. Central armrest, decent storage, nice little flock lining down the bottom. You got another USB port there, and it is sort of appointed in leather. It does feel pretty snazzy, although I must say it's not the highest quality leather. It's quite sticky when you sit down on it. You can't really rotate in your trousers, so it's not the most high quality in the world, but they don't have heating or cooling in these seats, which in an electric car in Australia means that you're going to be using a lot of energy to power that AC on a hot day. At least the driver does get electric adjustment, including lumbar support. It's in and out, not up and down, where the passenger seat does just get manual adjustment, but at least there's height adjust, so it's not like you're sitting right up in the ceiling. So not too bad on the comfort front. Couple of other things to note, this cool little rotary dial, which I think is pulled off rather well here in the e-Niro. You've got this kind of spaceship looking Star Trek Enterprise deck thing, drive mode selector, blank button, weird, and then your parking brake and all that sort of thing. And now we come to the materials in this car, because this is one of the bugbears of Kia, generally speaking. You do have nice sort of squidgy soft mold dash here, but straight away down from this piano black panel, which picks up fingerprints super easily, you get scratchy plastic, and that scratchy plastic goes all the way down. And I just think it starts a little bit higher than it ought to on a $70,000 car. At least you got soft mold door tops here and a soft armrest. Decent cup holder in the door as well. It's not super small. You can pretty easily fit a 1 litre bottle, and a little bit of odds and ends storage there as well. Finally, leather appointed steering wheel. Then I've got a snazzy looking 4.2-inch semi-digitized cluster in front of me. So that's pretty much the Kia e-Niro's front seat. Does it feel $71,000 without a sunroof? I'm not entirely convinced, to be honest. There are other cars out there, including the Tesla Model 3 and the Polestar 2, with better and more snazzy tech integration than this e-Niro, but it is at least easy to use and feels fairly well put together. But now we have pretty much the piece de resistance of the Kia e-Niro, and why I believe it really should be on your list if you're looking for a car that will work for rideshare or taller young children in the back but want an electric vehicle. And that's because it's packaged fantastically. Being only 5mm shorter than the Seltos small SUV, it has a 7cm longer wheelbase. So 2700mm, and that really pays off back here. Look at the knee room I've got. I'm 6'2", it's super comfortable back here, heaps of space. The toe room is a little bit tight, but because I've got enough knee room, it's not too bad in the end. And then headroom, my head is just brushing the ceiling, but the inclination of the backrest of this seat and the actual bench itself provides pretty decent under thigh support, although again, never going to be perfect for someone like me, but as far as back seats go, it's not too bad. You've also got a couple of niceties, including a fold down armrest with 2 little cup holders. You got your mat pocket behind the passenger seat, none behind the driver. And I should mention the back of the driver's seat is scratchy plastic, as is the door top. But you do at least have this padded little armrest with a nice sort of storage cubby you can put your phone or something in, and a fairly reasonable bottle holder that can take a 1 litre bottle. And yeah, decent view out over the front seat, pretty grandstandy sort of seating position. So overall, I think it does a pretty good job of being a really quite pleasant place to sit in the back of. And of course, almost forgot to mention, but we've got air vents back here as well, which is great for a hot country like Australia. If the Niro's party piece is its packaging, then it does a pretty good job of boot space as well, offering 451 litres under this manually operated tailgate. And at $70,000, manually operated tailgate on a small SUV does feel a little nickel-dimey. But anyway, we pop this load cover back, which is sort of plastic, and you can see that the 3 chasing car suitcases fit in here really nice and easily. You've got a bit of a load lip here, but because the car is actually quite a low vehicle, it means that it's not such a big deal to load suitcases. And then finally, we have a little bit more storage under the floor for things like the charging cable and things to change a tyre and a little inflation kit, but no space saver or full-size spare tyre on this EV. But I guess that's pretty fit for purpose, given its 455k range. So let's close that boot, and we'll talk about running costs. Now, this is the area wherein an electric vehicle has some real benefits. So for example, in New South Wales at least, there are still some areas where you can juice your car up free of charge, taking advantage of places like shopping centres, fast charging ports and that sort of thing. This car can fast charge up to 100 kilowatts maximum capacity, and that means you can get from 0 to 80% in about 54 minutes according to Kia, while energy consumption is officially rated at 15.9 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres, and that should get you about 455 kilometres of range. Now, driving this car, we've actually averaged slightly better than that. It's sitting about 14 16.2 kilowatt hours per 100 Ks on the trip computer, but that doesn't take into account natural battery degradation while the car's turned off. So that's still pretty good. But of course, you're not going to have access to the charging network you would do in a Tesla Model 3, and that's one of the big considerations when buying an EV in Australia. So you can let me know in the comment section down below if that's a turn off for you, or whether you're not worried, because we're going to get more infrastructure on the way very soon. Now let's talk about warranty and servicing, because like every Kia sold in Australia, it's got a 7-year unlimited kilometre warranty on the body and the physical components. However, the battery electrics, the high voltage stuff, is capped at 7 years and 150,000 Ks. Now to servicing, Kia quote 7 years of cap price servicing for the series parallel and plug-in hybrid variants of this vehicle, but they don't quote a price for the EV on the website. For the plug-in hybrid and the series parallel though, it's going to cost you $3,510 for 7 years of ownership, which is actually pretty expensive. So the real question in my head is, does this Kia e-Niro drive like a $71,000 car out on the road? And in some ways, yeah, but overarchingly, I think there's still some improvement to be made when this car gets facelift in another 6 to 8 months' time. So I guess the good thing is we have a lot to look forward to, because the electric tech actually feels pretty slick in this car. So under the bonnet, because this isn't a dedicated EV platform, it's shared with the Hyundai Ioniq sedan, not the Ioniq 5, but the Ioniq sedan, and it also gets a plug-in hybrid version and a series parallel hybrid, and that means it's a fairly conventional setup, having the 150 kilowatt and 395 Newton meter electric motor under the bonnet, and that's hooked up to the front wheels only in this car, so no all-wheel drive grip like you'd get in something like a more expensive version of the Tesla Model 3, and that does wreak havoc a little bit in the wet. It was raining earlier this morning, and driving this thing, traction control does cut in quite a lot, trying to curtail the wheel spin, but the good thing is that the traction control actually works quite well. The system is pretty slick, it simply limits power, and because of the electric power, it means that it limits grunt quite well, and it can be a little bit more accurate than when you've got a petrol engine front wheel drive car, and even when the wheels are spinning, you're not getting horrible axle tramp like you would do in a cheaper front wheel drive car. So it certainly feels slicker than a petrol car or a combustion car in general in terms of the way the power is delivered as well. Obviously you've got all of the torque all the time, so you can just stomp on the throttle and off we go. It's got a real kick to it, and it means that you can sort of thread through traffic really nicely. Despite this car's weight, the power of an i20N hatchback, I should mention, means that, yeah, you can make pretty decent progress in this thing, up to about 80-90 Ks an hour. Much above that, and it starts to run out of puff a little bit, like on the freeway, but still, where you're going to be using this car mostly in urban environments, it's really nippy, fast, and pretty simple to use. And now let's talk about how the Niro's electric regeneration system works, because like quite a lot of slightly previous gen EVs, we've got 2 paddles on the steering wheel to adjust regen braking, but it's not a full 1-pedal system. It doesn't bring you all the way to a stop. Even on regen level 3, it slows down nicely, but it doesn't slow you down below 10 Ks an hour. So you still do need to use the brake pedal, and I think probably the facelift of this car might address that, because it's really nice to be able to drive an EV with 1 pedal and know that you're always regenning power. I quite like that. But yeah, level 1 we've got it on now is quite natural for a combustion car. Level 2 is as though you've changed down a gear. Pretty straightforward and easy to use. And yeah, I mean, that's really what this Niro is. It's a straightforward and easy EV to get used to. You don't have any crazy tech in here. There's no touchscreen to get used to. You've got all these controls here. So in terms of a first foot in the door of EV ownership, sure, it's definitely got its benefits. But in terms of, you know, being a tech masterpiece, it's not that kind of car. But it does at least have a really nice chassis underpinning it. It's quite an adjustable car. And a lot of that as well comes down to how low the battery sits in this car. You can see it actually underneath from the profile. You can see where the sort of silver battery pack comes to, and yeah, it feels like that when you drive it. It feels like it's got a low center of gravity. Now, I'm not saying it's a hot hatch at all. These 215/55 series Michelin Primacy Eco tires are definitely on the lower grip end of the spectrum, but they do at least give good feedback and nice consistent feel. So when you're on a country road like we are now, the Niro actually doesn't feel outclassed. You've got plenty of adjustment for the driver to play with mid-corner. The engine braking, or rather I should say engine regen, helps that too. It helps it sort of point around on the nose. So even when this car's out of its comfort zone, it's actually pretty fun, and yeah, quite an enjoyable car to thread down a country road at reasonable speed, which is nice to see. I know it's not the real intention of this car, but it's nice to know that it's safe and can do that for a small SUV. And then, being a contemporary vehicle, there are obviously a suite of drive modes to choose from. You've got a pretty interesting Eco Plus mode, which defaults the aircon to driver only and limits you to 90 k's an hour, which I guess is really good if you're running low on juice, although this car doesn't tend to do that because it's actually got a pretty decent 455 kilometer range, which is very accurate, as is here on the trip computer. And you've also got normal, which we're in now, regular eco, and then you've got sport as well, which really sharpens up the throttle response and makes this car a little bit of a ragged sort of micro warm hatch. It's quite interesting, but I think my preference overall is driving just in normal. Now, although a lot of the handling characteristics in this vehicle are down to the low center of gravity, there is also a fairly firm suspension setup for this sort of car that does grate a little bit, especially at lower speeds. There's a constant jiggliness to it, and that's largely down to the fact that this Niro never actually received a full comprehensive Australian suspension tune. Instead, it picks up the European suspension tune because it is pretty much a European car. It's made for European markets. It does definitely ride a little bit more firmly than Kia's Australian products. But of course, trade-off, country road handling, that's great. But I reckon with the impending facelift, if they're really going to try and sell Niro hard in Australia, an Australian suspension tune is something that's going to need to happen. And finally, we come on to safety, which is pretty decent in this Niro, but again, it doesn't get all of the stuff that you expect. It doesn't get reverse or junction AEB, it just gets frontal AEB with pedestrian and cyclist detection. You get blind spot monitoring, lane trace assist, lane keep assist, and also adaptive cruise control to make this thing a pretty cruisy thing to drive down the highway in. So, what do we think of the Kia e-Niro? Well, put it this way. If the combustion car is like the cassette tape and the EV6 and the Tesla Model 3 are like the CD-ROM, then the Kia e-Niro just feels a little bit like the mini disc. Something that is good, novel, and quite an interesting approach, but one that's probably going to be forgotten in the sands of time. That's not to say it's a bad vehicle at all, because it has some really good high points, surprisingly good handling, and punchy acceleration, owing to the electric motor, of course. And also, it would be a really interesting car to buy if you were looking to do ride sharing, owing to the low cost of energy consumption and also its fantastic practicalities. But you can let me know in the comment section down below whether you spend over $70,000 on a Kia EV or whether you'd look somewhere else. And while you're down there, leave me a comment. We'd also love it if you could hit like and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.